So, on the cover of your order of service, you will see a somewhat famous image, a variation among many of Jean-Francois Millet or Jean-Francois Millet's painting known as The Sower. The Sower. It's over at the MFA. You can see it whenever you want, and it is a dramatic image. We've talked about it a little bit before. This painting is in part the product of 19th century enthusiasm for pictures, stories, and images that depict real, contemporary, and often rural scenes. But no doubt its creator was well aware of the parable that we read today. And so it also has a place in the long tradition of devotional and biblical art, as it depicts the central character and the only true actor in today's reading from Mark. In the painting, the sower is a farmer, digging deep into his bag, scattering handfuls of seeds into the wind. No doubt in the hope that those seeds would take root, would find good ground and grow through to harvest time. There's a sense of possible abundance in this picture. But there is also risk. The risk that these seeds may not fall on fertile soil. Now, theologically, the sower in the Bible is similar. Here, too, we see the same dynamic. Hope, faith, and risk are in its casting as well. But in the image that Jesus paints with his words, the seeds are seeds of wisdom, or enlightenment, or connection. You can choose your favorite spirit word. I don't particularly care. You get the idea. The seeds are seeds of wisdom. Now, the sower is not a gardener. The sower is not a gardener. And given the readings and hymns, you might have thought we were going to talk about gardens, but for better or ill, a gardener spends more time nurturing the investment, both in the planting and in the protecting of what is planted. Whereas the sower just strews the seeds, just chucks them out onto the land with the expectation that they will be growing in the midst of the seeds that have already taken root there. Some of those seeds will have been ones that were planted by the sower in previous years, but others will have arrived by other means and have different appearances, uses, and nutritional values. Animals, water, and wind, and the very churning and preparation of the earth that brings buried seeds closer to the surface means that the seeds cast by the sower, either the farmer or the divine sower, exist in something more diverse, more dynamic, stronger than what we manage for our gardens, where the purpose is the highest yield of certain plants over other plants. The sower influences the ecosystem of the field more slowly than the gardener. As the sower's seeds take root this year, they join seeds from last year, and more will root next year and the next, building up over time within this diverse environment. And this brings us to the challenge I encountered in trying to write this sermon today. A sermon about something that arguably doesn't exist in the parable itself. Namely, a sermon about weeds, about undesirables. Now, as we talked about earlier in our reading today, Celia Thaxter is one of my favorite writers and thinkers. And in this passage, she comes out as hating weeds, declaring that if there were no other enemies which the gardener must fight, this one of weeds alone is quite enough to tax all their powers and patience. Celia Thaxter hates weeds, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I hate to weed. I've always hated weeding. And while I may have rationalized this aspect of my own personality a bit more than is necessary, I do not actually mind a bit of biodiversity between the rows in my tiny garden. I do not mind spiritual diversity in my house of worship either. Now, of course, there are times when weeding is necessary. That should be obvious. In certain contexts, we need to make sure that the ground is receptive to the thing we need. A vegetable garden is graded on its yield of vegetables, after all, and specifically on the vegetables that were planted on purpose, not the volunteer plants who get in the way. Also, outside the actual garden, but instead in the world that we move through, there are habits and ideas and toxic personalities that need to be culled or restricted from our lives, need to be weeded out so that we can thrive. But we will probably always be aware of the need for that weeding, for that kind of weeding, or at least understand its importance if we can't manage to do it sometimes. The problem is that sometimes we weed too much and in the wrong way. We live in a society, for example, that is very comfortable with uprooting what it thinks is undesirable. And the Big C church, the Church Universal, does that too. We see this in both religious and secular debates, in our arguments around things like civil rights or immigration or poverty. Our dominant secular culture in service to the economy frequently asks us who or what in this system that we live in is good. Who or what is good, fruitful, productive, and worthy of inclusion in the garden we are making. And it also asks who or what is bad. Who or what is using resources, creating confusion and chaos in a place that we like to think of as organized, as structured. Now, the answer to that question is unclear at best. Quite possibly because there is no satisfactory answer, because as we have discussed in this room before, who is in the garden and who is out is a question created by the secular powers to maintain the structures of this world, not to build or grow the commonwealth of heaven. Besides, we can't answer that question without our own judgment. And our judgments are almost always based on our personal, specific biases in specific contexts. Going back to those plants for a minute. For many people, the beautiful and edible flower known as the dandelion is a wonderful gift to the landscape. When seen afar in a field, it's Instagrammable, right? But when that same flower is on somebody's lawn, it is often seen as an excuse for chemical warfare. And there's a certain somewhat classy salad green that used to get Barack Obama in trouble, known as arugula, when we plant it on purpose. But when it is found between the rows, so to speak, or in the cracks in the sidewalk, it is called rocket. And it is perceived as a nasty, bitter invader. We only have to glance at our newspapers this morning to note that, yes, we do treat people like that too. As a society, we treat people like weeds. It isn't hard to realize that humanity right now has serious problems accepting diversity. And all of this makes us anxious. Anxious about how we go about our own lives. Or at least it makes me anxious. Maybe you don't worry. It makes us so worried about being productive, about being accepted as upstanding, that we sometimes have trouble leaving the row in the garden to which we have been assigned. But on the other hand, we are also anxious because in our own weeding, our own decisions about how we live our lives and how we perceive the lives of others, as people of faith, specifically people who participate in a liberal, progressive faith, we are rightly concerned that we need to proceed with caution in culling and curating, pausing to see the holy in others, remaining open and inclusive to new ideas, new inspiration, individuals, and groups. We cannot help but ask ourselves, along with the poet Bill Frere, if I must uproot the riffraff, who stands on their behalf? Who stands on their behalf? And the answer to that question is that, perhaps obviously, while we don't always know who does, we all probably should stand on their behalf. After all, the Bible tells us that we all got kicked out of that metaphorical garden a long, long time ago. And now we are jumbled together in a sort of wilderness, and our hope lies in a different kind of cultivation than what a garden permits. So let's go back to the sower for a minute and that deep bag of seeds. Now, in the parable, some of the seeds land in a place where they can take root. And then the rest land in less hospitable places. And it may at first be tempting to think of these hearers who fail to gain the wisdom that the sower is offering as being in some sense responsible for their inability to understand. But what is really happening is something different. Something different. Later in the same reading, Jesus gives us a brief description of the ways people don't hear. And it turns out the listeners aren't entirely to blame. But instead, as so often happens, responsibility lies with the ones who have the power, the ones who choose the nature of the ground others inhabit. Seeds on the path, you may recall, are stolen by no less an entity than Satan. But then seeds on the rocky ground are greeted with joy, but they cannot put down roots. And what ultimately kills them is, according to Jesus in Mark, trouble and persecution. Persecution kills those seeds. Those in the thorns fail because of the cares of the world, Jesus tells us, and the lure of wealth. These are conditions that are brought upon us from outside, not inherent in ourselves. There's nothing in this passage about religious nonconformists, agnostics, atheists, or free thinkers refusing the gift of insight or blocking that of others. There's nothing about people rich or poor who deviate from whatever society currently thinks of as the norm. Instead, Jesus talks about the soil. And maybe there, in the soil, is where we should direct our action and our attention. In each of those non-fertile places, there is someone or something curating the landscape, doing the weeding. And taking them, the so-called cultivators, gardeners, deciders, out of the equation might just be what would make that ground ultimately receptive to all the seed that is sown. It turns out that our task in these situations may very well be to be weeds ourselves, to refuse to behave, to promote diversity in our various ecologies, to be a thorn in the side of those thorns, resistance to trouble and persecution, pointing ourselves away from the cares of the world and the lure of wealth. Now, Margaret Gaddy, who is not a fan of garden weeds, at least, says that it is not being venomous or ugly that makes a weed. It's not being venomous or ugly that makes a weed, but it's being impertinent. Impertinent. And I cannot help but think that in a well-ordered garden, the one that the powers desire and that seems to exclude so many, maybe we need to be impertinent weeds too. It turns out, of course, that impertinence is sometimes necessary. So we should not fear it or rise immediately to judge it, understanding that what is a weed today may be our salvation another day, and that all creation is sacred and holy. So may we expect wonders. May we expect wonders from seeds, from fruit and vegetables, from trees, flowers, and yes, even the weeds. For who knows from what seed our enlightenment will come.